To understand the reasons for the Japanese Expeditionary Force into Siberia in 1918, we must provide some background. The Japanese Empire had been expanding within the region during the early 1900s. Formosa, currently known as Taiwan, Korea and a portion of Sakhalin were part of the Imperial Japanese Empire. Also within the area, the British had colonies of Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea and Singapore, to mention a few. The American Empire had the Philippines, Wake, Guam and Johnson Island. The German Empire also had a few islands in the Pacific, such as German Samoa and German New Guinea. Upon winning the war, it was agreed that German colonies would be divided between the Allies. German colonies below the equator, illustrated by the red line, would become part of the British Empire, while the German colonies above the equator was mandated to the Japanese Empire. The area marked in green are the German colonies to become part of the British Empire. Above the equator, marked in green, are the islands to join the Japanese Empire. Yap, the Carolinas, Mariana and the Marshall Islands, to name a few. The commanders of the Siege of Qingdao, a German city fortification in China. Seated on the left is Lieutenant General Kamio Mitsuomi of the Imperial Japanese Army, and Major General Nathaniel Barnardiston of the British Army on the right. In 1914, the start of World War I, the Imperial Japanese Army bombarded the German fortification of Qingdao, with 142 howitzers, firing 1,200, 280 mm shells. A total of 23,000 Japanese soldiers and 1,500 British soldiers were engaged in this combat action. British and Japanese forces simply took possession of the German colonies, by landing troops. There was no resistance. The colonies were not defended. The war in Asia with Germany was over. However, the war in Europe continued. The Allies, France and Great Britain, were bogged down on the Western Front, while the Russian troops on the Eastern Front were mismanaged and experiencing significant losses to German battle tactics. During the month of November 1917, the Russian Revolution overthrew Tsar Nicholas II, and the Bolsheviks ended the war with Germany by signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The Eastern Front German troops, who were fighting the Russians, packed up their weapons and headed to the Western Front. The British and the French insisted that Japan and the United States fight with the White Russians to defeat the Red Army, the Bolsheviks, to keep Russia in the war, and re-establish the Eastern Front against Germany. The British and the French had limited resources to spare for Siberia. Since the United States Congress did not declare war on any Russian government, most of the Allied fighting in Siberia was conducted by the Imperial Japanese Army. Japan was concerned about the workers' revolution possibly spilling over into the colony of Korea. Therefore, the Japanese leadership committed 72,000 troops to fight the Bolsheviks. General Kakuzo Otani arrives in Vladivostok to command the Imperial Japanese Army in Siberia. This army, by far, was the best Allied army, having the most training and experience in fighting in Siberia. They had successfully fought the Russians in the Russo-Japan War, from 1904 to 1905. In addition, in 1914, this army fought and beat the German army at Qingdao. Their combat experience initiated changes in tactics, uniforms, weapons, and troop rations, to meet the conditions in Siberia. The commander, General Otani, established his headquarters in Vladivostok. He is a seasoned officer, having served in the First Sino-Japanese War, the Russo-Japanese War and the Siege of Qingdao. Japanese troops provide security for the city, and the railroad station in Vladivostok. The control of Siberia, stretching more than 5,000 kilometers, from the Ural Mountains to Vladivostok, requires controlling the Trans-Siberian Railroad. The Japanese army supported the most prevalent anti-Bolshevik group in Siberia, the Cossacks. The Cossacks had a horsemanship tradition, spanning centuries across Russia. They were highly skilled riders, swordsmen, and rugged individuals, serving as well-trained cavalry. This predominant Slavic, Orthodox Christian group was extremely loyal to Tsar Nicholas II. They were barbaric anti-Bolsheviks, who committing atrocities on the Russian people, in the name of the White Army. They are of robust stock, handsome, lively, industrious, submissive to authority, brave, good-natured, hospitable, indefatigable, and intelligent. The traditional Cossack weapons were the lance and saber. They kept a knife in their belt and a 4-foot nagaika, a small whip, in their boot, which was used on people to keep order and intimidate them. The most notorious Cossacks were Ataman Gregory Semenov, who was headquartered in Chita, and Ataman Alexander Kalmykov, who was headquartered in Khabarovsk. The Japanese Army sent platoon-level detachments at various outposts along the Trans-Siberian Railroad. However, the main garrisons were at Vladivostok and Khabarovsk. Here is a rare film of General Keisuke with his staff, coming from Port Arthur, to visit Colonel Steyer, commander of the 27th Infantry Division. Japanese officers frequently visited Colonel Steyer to resolve railroad issues and insist American troops take an active role to fight the Bolsheviks. General William S. Graves, commander of the American Expeditionary Force to Siberia, gave specific orders that American troops must take no part in arresting people because of their political affiliations. They have no authority to confine Russian citizens unless they commit some illegal act. Here is a view of the Imperial Japanese 12th Infantry Division's headquarters entrance at Khabarovsk, Russia. This headquarters, as well as all Allied building accommodation, were built by the Russians at the time of the Russo-Japan War. Let us enter the headquarters and meet General Oy, the commander of the 12th Infantry Division. He is 55 years old in this command position. General Oy was the commander of the 12th Infantry Division, which forced out the Bolsheviks from Khabarovsk. General Oy, with his staff officers, are celebrating their success. Many Imperial Japanese Army officers were sent to Germany for training after the German victory in the 1870 Franco-Prussian War. Baron Oy Shigemoto, at the age of 18, entered the Imperial Japanese Army Academy, and graduated from the Imperial War College in 1887. In February 1890, Lieutenant Oy continued his studies in Germany with the Prussian Army, because it had a very comprehensive modern officer training program. He was attached to the Prussian Army's 113th Infantry Regiment. He saw firsthand how German soldiers were trained to Prussian Army standards. Physical training, military tactics, weapons targeting, and Prussian discipline were part of his study curriculum. Captain Oy returned to Japan in 1895 and was assigned to the staff of the Imperial Japanese Army, Second Army. Captain Oy was an instructor at the War College and had numerous staff positions up to being promoted to colonel in 1905, followed by another promotion to Major General in 1909, at which time he took command of the 19th Infantry Brigade. In mid-1918, he was transferred to the 12th Division, and was shipped to Siberia. Then 13 months later, Lieutenant General Oy was the commanding officer of the Japanese Vladivostok Expeditionary Force. Although the American troops did not take combat offensives against the Bolshevik, they did cooperate with the Japanese Army. They guarded sections of the Trans-Siberian Railroad and provided railroad car Red Cross medical facilities. General Oy worked closely with Colonel Steyer and Captain Sharmotulsky to resolve railroad issues and address incidents involving American soldiers and Japanese troops. After a pleasant and productive meeting, Colonel Steyer and staff leave the Japanese 12th Infantry Division headquarters in Khabarovsk. After a pleasant meeting, General Oy and staff take a photo opportunity with the U.S. Army Signal Corps cameraman. Many Japanese officers spoke English. They were very polite, accommodating, and cooperative during their meeting with Allied officers. Imperial Japanese Army infantry training, in the early 1900s, consisted of bayonet, sword training, marching, and rifle training. The bayonet training shown here illustrates the Japanese concept of up close and personal, in man-to-man combat. In contrast, the British and American infantry bayonet training consisted of bayonet charges towards hanging dummies. This training was continued, although after 1850, the bayonet's role in combat was insignificant. It was a symbol of courage, rather than an offensive weapon. The Japanese were less ill than the other Allied forces. This may be attributed to the rations issued by the Imperial Japanese government, usually consisted of rice with barley, meat or fish, vegetables, pickled vegetables, umeboshi, shoyu sauce, miso or bean paste, and green tea. This is a view of the Khabarovsk train station. The Japanese troops are loading cargo trains to leave for the winter. In this region, the temperature range of -31 to -41 degrees centigrade is typical. At these low temperatures, a bottle of whiskey turns into a bottle of syrup. Marching, performing guard duty, or rifle shooting, in these extreme temperature may result in frostbite. Exposed skin in the Siberia winter is most vulnerable to frostbite, but it can affect skin covered by gloves or other clothing. This soldier's feet has frostbite requiring medical treatment. To minimize exposure to these extreme temperatures, the Japanese army loaded flat railroad cars and left for the winter. In addition, they fielded the Type 41, 75mm mountain gun, having a range of 7,022 meters. They also fielded Type 41, 75mm cavalry gun, having a maximum range of 8,380 meters. They also fielded the Type 38, 15cm howitzers, having a maximum range 7,200 meters. The Japanese troops used the Type 38, a 75mm gun, having a maximum range of 2,377 meters. After the Japanese Expeditionary Force returned to Japan, in 1922, it was apparent that the predominant Allied effort, by the Japanese, to destroy the Bolshevik army failed. The brutal tactics and corruption of the autocratic, pro-Tsarist White Army alienated Russian peasants. Less than 10% of the Russian population supported the White Army. Please comment and subscribe.